right, and here we are. I'm attorney James Betzold. Welcome to this live stream this evening. We're Eastern time here. It's about 6:34 p.m. So I just want to say hello. I'm attorney James Betzold. I'm an immigration attorney licensed to practice law in the state of Michigan and throughout the United States. Let's begin with this. Here's my banner. Right, that's me in Spanish and English. Hablamos Español, también hablamos inglés. We speak English and Spanish. There's our phone number. If you have questions, please do so by submitting them through the comments. I'll be keeping an eye on the comments here. And as we get going here, I just want to introduce our topic for today. Our topic for today is a VAWA case. What does VAWA stand for? Eligible. What are the requirements? What do we need to get started on a VAWA case? So let's get ready. All right, now that we have somebody watching, let's begin talking about VAWA cases. First of all, we're going to be doing this live stream in English today. When we get to the question and answer portion, please feel free to ask questions in either English or Spanish. So we're talking about immigration cases, right? I'm an immigration attorney, and we're going to talk about VAWA cases today. Violence Against Women Act. That is the name of the statute we're talking about. Now, back in the 90s, Congress realized that there is a huge power imbalance between spouses when one of them has papers and the other does not. And that imbalance can lead to abuse, extreme cruelty. So what they did is they passed a law called VAWA, and it's been reauthorized year after year. It has to be reauthorized consistently. And so what it does is it allows a victim of domestic violence or extreme cruelty to apply for their own visa, independent of their abuser. Their abuser may be a spouse, be a child, maybe a parent. But it must be a parent, child, or spouse who is a U.S. citizen or legal permanent resident. Now, maybe you at some point have been a victim of domestic violence. Maybe you know somebody who has been. Maybe you have a family member who has been. These are very important cases that we handle. And one of the first concerns that people have are, what is going to happen to me? In a VAWA case, this petitioner, the individual, is able to petition for themselves, independent of the abuser. The abuser is not contacted by immigration. The USCIS, or the Immigration Service here, does not ask for their opinion on what happened or if they deserve a visa or not, because we all know in situations of abuse, there's what we call a conflict of interest, typically. Now, how does this arise? Now, if you think about it, as I've stated, in many situations, an immigrant has an unequal power balance with their spouse. And typically it'll show up in one of these ways. It can be in the form of verbal abuse, verbal put downs. So it could be in front of other people or maybe just alone at home. If the U.S. citizen or legal resident spouse is saying things like, you don't have any rights. You have to do what I say. Otherwise, you can't, I won't do your papers. I won't petition for you. It may have something like, or maybe a situation where there's physical violence, okay, where someone is actually a victim of physical violence in that relationship and they can't leave because they know if they do, they could be hunted down. They might have to leave their kids behind. They might have to leave their only home behind. They have no way to support themselves. And it's a terrible situation. So petitioning for yourself under a VAWA case is a very good option for someone who's been the victim of domestic violence or extreme cruelty. You have these two options, right, in these types of cases. And of course, VAWA cases are only covering situations where you have a U.S. citizen spouse or a U.S. legal permanent resident spouse. Okay, if it's just a boyfriend or girlfriend, that doesn't count. There's a different visa we can talk about. It's a U visa. We'll go over that another time. Today's focus is VAWA cases. Now, when you're going over these fact patterns for a VAWA case, one of the things we look for is it domestic violence? Is there like an actual hitting, screaming, verbal abuse, any sort of domestic violence that's involved? Or is it a case of extreme cruelty? And sometimes there's some overlap in these cases. When you have a case of domestic violence, it's usually pretty clear. Hopefully you've got a police report. Hopefully this is something that's been reported to the police over and over, or at least once. As the attorney, we would want to grab that police report and include that with the VAWA petition. That makes them a very good open and shut type case. Other types of cases, though, if you don't have documentation of the physical abuse, you might be able to get friends and family, other people who know about the situation, to write affidavits. That, in combination with the person's own affidavit, can be sufficient to apply for VAWA. Now, if you've got one of these cases that you really don't have the physical violence, but it's more of a verbal abuse situation, depending on the state you're in, a lot of states' domestic violence laws actually will cover verbal abuse, right? A lot of people don't understand this, but if you're in your house and you're arguing with your spouse or someone, and someone gets mad, right? We're not going to say who. We'll say it's Susan, right? Susan gets mad. She picks up her cell phone and throws it against the wall, right? Chucks it against the wall past the spouse's head, and it goes flying through the drywall, right? We all know that this is possible. We all know that physical displays of violence or aggression are pretty common in domestic situations. If this happens in the state of Michigan, this counts as domestic violence. Someone can be charged with domestic violence in this circumstance. Now, this can even in Michigan include if it's not directed at a particular person. So if I'm looking at someone, I'm mad, and I turn face the other way and I throw a dish at the wall, that can still be considered domestic violence. If that gets reported to the police, that's going to be exhibit number 1 in a VAWA case. Now, if it's a case where you don't have those physical acting out, that physical violence that's going on, you can still file a case based on extreme cruelty. And that is a fun little definition. What counts as extreme cruelty? If anybody has questions on a specific scenario, I don't need to particularly announce your name or anything here, but if you do want to know if something would count as extreme cruelty or domestic violence, why don't you go ahead and throw that in the comments? I'll be willing to take those questions right now. But essentially, extreme cruelty is just what it sounds like. It's something more than regular cruelty. It's got some sort of extreme element to it. And there's a few examples. Now, this is a family-friendly well, it's not a family-friendly program. Let's be honest. We're talking about domestic violence. If your kids are in the room, you don't want them watching this with you right now. But let's use some YouTube-friendly language as we're trying to describe these situations, okay? Let's take a couple hypothetical examples. There's a husband and a wife. And the wife is the U.S. citizen, let's say. We've had this case before. And the husband is the undocumented immigrant who's waiting for the spouse to do the paperwork, and the spouse is routinely failing to file paperwork. And routinely, this U.S. citizen spouse will tell the undocumented husband, "You're worthless. You're a piece of garbage. You don't work enough. You got to make me money. You're not making me money. You gotta give me your paycheck, and you got to do what I say. I handle the finances. I need to get my nails done. I need to get my hair done. I need to get my facial things done. I need, all sorts of stuff." And so in this case, the immigrant really has no choice but to do exactly what she says, with the hope that she'll do the paperwork. Well, things tend to progress in relationships like that. In situations where there's any sort of domestic abuse or violence, things tend to not get better until there's some sort of big act that takes place. And so the natural progression of these relationships can be like this. It's not unheard of for the spouse to say, well, your genitals are insufficient. Your manliness isn't sufficient. You are not manly enough for me, and you're terrible at doing manly type things. All right? You can take that in any sort of intimate context, right? When that gets applied. Is that extreme cruelty? It can be. If it happens over and over. If it's a pattern of the spouse really trying to break down the self-esteem and the will of the other person, that can be considered extreme cruelty. And we've had cases that we've won in that very scenario. It gets even more extreme if this is something that the U.S. citizen spouse or resident spouse is doing to their spouse in public. right? So it could be at the Walmart, could be at Walgreens, and there's some public altercation or some arguing. Maybe the police get called, maybe they don't. Maybe this is just in a group of friends at a party. Maybe people are drinking a little bit and things start to get out of hand, and people start expressing their true feelings, right? In vino veritas, right? What they say in wine, truth. And unfortunately, people start to say mean things, and they start to break down the other person in an extremely cruel way in front of their people. Well, that's extreme, right? It's not just somebody making the observation to themselves saying, oh, yes, my man isn't quite manly enough, or my woman isn't quite womanly enough, or whatever the situation may be. When you do that in public, you're berating them publicly. That can be considered extreme cruelty, especially if there's a pattern of that sort of behavior. All right, we got the hair going all over the place. What else can be extreme cruelty? We've had even cases as extreme as, the spouse is told they have to stay in the home, like physically stay in the house. No, you can't go out. You can't have your own friends. You can't go to the store. You can't go buy some clothes. You can't go get a job. You have to stay in the house doing whatever it is that I want, period. And we've seen cases like this for men and for women, whether it's the husband who's being the abuser or the wife who's being the abuser. Because the wonderful thing about a VAWA case, and like I've alluded to in the title of this video, is VAWA cases only for women. Well, the law literally says the Violence Against Women Act. So it's an act of Congress to prevent violence against women. However, the United States Supreme Court has said under the 14th Amendment that we have equal protection under the law. So if a law applies to women, that could also apply to men, then it must also apply to men. And so we in our firm have been very successful in winning VAWA cases for women and also for men. I guess instead of VAWA, oh no, it wouldn't be MAWA, that would be something else. All right, so let's keep going here. Does anybody have any questions about what would be considered extreme cruelty in the context of a VAWA case, a case of domestic violence? Here we are. I see people sort of jumping in and out of the show here. Let me just give a brief synopsis of what we're discussing today. We're talking about VAWA cases. VAWA stands for Violence Against Women Act. It is a type of case that we can file with immigration in order to help someone obtain their status here in the United States, independent of a spouse who may be abusive to them, either physically abusive, emotionally abusive, subjecting them to what is called extreme cruelty. If we have any questions about that, please feel free to ask. Estamos aceptando preguntas en inglés y también en español, porque hablamos los dos aquí. All right, so we're going to talk a little more about VAWA cases. Now, what is it that you get once you file a VAWA case? Well, in the process, we begin by gathering a lot of information, right? We need as many documents, as much evidence as we can. We get that together, we file it. And before long, depending, immigration is going to send what is called a prima facie determination, or an initial grant of deferred action, right? So this is something where the United States Department of Immigration says, hey, we see it looks like you've been the victim of domestic violence or extreme cruelty. We're going to take a closer look at the case. In the meantime, we're not going to try and deport you. You don't have to worry about getting removed from the United States. You don't have to worry about any of that. And here's a work permit. So immediately this individual is able to go get their driver's license, obtain a social security card, so they can start legally and lawfully working, becoming independent of their abusive spouse. They can even begin the process of filing for divorce if they need it. We'll talk about divorce in a minute, its effects. These are some of the topics we're dealing with when we deal with a VAWA case. Now, I have seen a number of these cases over the last 15 years of practicing law. And a lot of times, someone will come in either alone, hesitant, not really wanting to open up, not really wanting to file an application, maybe just gathering some information. It takes courage, right? It takes courage as a victim of domestic violence and of extreme cruelty to be able to file one of these applications. But what we always like to do is reassure the individual that, look, this is a step on your path to independence. Pretty soon you're going to be able to handle you're going to be able to handle life by yourself. You'll be financially independent. You'll be working. You'll be able to get your own driver's license. Pretty soon you'll get your own car. Maybe you have a car already. You'll have a social security number, and you won't need to rely on someone who's abusive to you. Courage is number one. So a lot of times if somebody comes in alone, they may come once, may come back another time, maybe a couple of years before they get the courage to actually file these cases. But once they do, time starts ticking, and those, the work permit comes in the mail, and eventually you get all the way to becoming a legal permanent resident in the United States. 5 years after that, eligible for citizenship. So that's one of the great things about a VAWA case. Now, here's some complications with VAWA cases, of course. You can file for VAWA, right, for this residency based on being a victim of domestic violence, even if you're divorced, as long as 2 years have not gone by, right? So if you're able to go through the process and get a divorce because the situation is terrible, and, definitely consult with an attorney beforehand, but it shouldn't stop you from doing the right thing. You can get divorced, and that's when that 2-year clock starts ticking. You can be divorced up to 2 years and still file a VAWA case. Once you hit 2 years and a day, you've lost an option. Okay, so you just want to be aware of that. Now, you don't have to be divorced, and you don't have to file divorce if you're filing a VAWA case either. That's up to you. And you don't ever have to end up actually getting divorced. I've had a number of clients who've done exactly this. They go to their spouse and they say, "You're mean to me. I don't like it. And I'm going to get my own papers because now I've got a police report against you, or because you've been cruel to me." Or they may not even tell their spouse until the green card comes in the mail. And they may be able to patch things up, or maybe the spouse changes their behavior or is repentant or something like that. So it's not required to get divorced either. It's completely optional. It puts the power back in the hand of the victim. So the victim gets to decide, do I want to get divorced? There is that 2-year time limit if you do, but you have that choice. Nothing says you have to. Nothing says you can't, right? So you have the freedom to do the right thing, the thing that is right for you at the time. All right, talking about VAWA cases today. VAWA, Violence Against Women Act. A couple nice things about a VAWA case. One, of course, it's a way that you can get deferred action in the United States. It does lead to your residency or the green card status. It does eventually lead to U.S. citizenship. So those are some pretty fantastic benefits. In the meantime, you do get a work permit, be able to work, live, drive, everything here in the U.S. Now, a lot of people ask me this. They say, well, I don't want to get my spouse in trouble, but yes, they hit me. No, I didn't call the police. What should I do? And I said, well, first of all, you don't need to worry about what's going to happen to your spouse, right? You're here. You've found an attorney. You obviously are considering doing this, and it could be the right thing to do. In any situation involving domestic violence, you do want to be careful. You really have to get, as an attorney, right? I'll speak as an attorney to attorneys or to friends who might be supporting people in this situation. You want a plan of action. Right now, there's a lot of community organizations that will help with things like this. One of them in our area is called Resilience, right? Domestic violence shelter, women's shelter. And they have caseworkers who will help you devise a plan, or even sitting down with an attorney or a support person, a friend, a family member. You figure out, what is it that I need in order to be safe? And typically that includes, you're not going to communicate what you're doing to the spouse. That may also include finding a safe place to live. It might include saving up some money so you can go rent your own apartment, obtaining employment so you'll be able to support yourself. And I know that's darn near impossible for an undocumented immigrant at this point. And so a lot of times there's some not concessions, there's compromises sometimes that have to be made. Right? Sometimes you actually need a person who's there to financially support you if there's some sort of imminent danger in your own home. And one of the options that victims of domestic violence have in the United States is go to the police. The United States and the police here in the U.S., independent of what state you're in, very different than the police in Mexico, in Colombia, in Honduras, El Salvador, Guatemala, Nicaragua, Venezuela. You pick, right? You choose a country. The police in the United States are much more professional. if you go there and report that you've been the victim of domestic violence, and it was an immediate thing, or if you call 911, police will come to your door. They'll investigate what's going on. A lot of times they'll remove somebody if they've been violent. So they'll actually take them out of the picture. And once that person is arrested for domestic violence, if they're able to get out on bond, it's probably not going to be that night. They'll probably have to talk to a judge first. And the judge will likely put in place a condition that says no contact with the victim, which will mean until the end of that criminal case is over, it will be against the law for them to have contact with the victim. Right? So we want to take all these things into consideration. Is it wise to call the police? Is it really the only thing we can do? Do we need to find a safe place and then call the police? Do we, what's the best way to do that? Who's a support person that can help me with each of these things? Do I reach out to a local organization, or do I have a friend who can walk me through it? Whenever there's any sort of imminent violence or danger, plan of action is going to be something that's very important. Part of that should be reporting to the authorities. Part of that should be talking to your attorney. Part of that should be not letting your spouse know that you're able to file for a green card independent of them. And I guarantee you, your attorney is not going to be able to communicate with them. They have safeguards in place. In our office, we have all our systems have a special note where if there is some sort of domestic violence situation, we put it very clearly in there. It's very visible. Do not talk with the spouse of this person. They're dangerous. They've threatened. They've had the police called on them. And the person, and then all the documents, for example, that get submitted or communications, you need to be very careful with those. So the communication maintains its privacy, its confidentiality between the attorney and the client, and then to the U.S. Immigration Services. So there's a number of things you can do to create a safety plan for someone who's been a victim of domestic violence. Filing a VAWA case is typically one of those things. I'll be willing to take any questions. I know there's a couple people popping in and out of here. Let me see here. I can read and see things from Facebook pages, Facebook profiles, posts to Facebook pages and profiles, YouTube posts and comments here. Any questions? We will take those. We'll probably wrap up in a few more minutes here. But the topic of today is VAWA cases. It stands for Violence Against Women Act. Some people may ask, well, how do I do this? And I know most attorneys out there will be like, well, go find an attorney and do that. Well, it's not just attorneys. There's no requirement when petitioning for an immigration benefit that it actually be done by an attorney. Unless you're in immigration court, then you must be licensed, or you either from the Board of Immigration Appeals as someone who's authorized to practice before them, or a licensed attorney who is also licensed to practice before the immigration court. They've got a whole login system and things that are required for that. Go ahead and put any questions into the comments. I will see those here. Just going to throw up my banner here so you can see that right now. Go into our brand assets, and this is me. I'm attorney James Betzold, an immigration attorney here in Holland, Michigan, Grand Rapids, Michigan. 15 years of experience working directly with the immigrant community here. We work directly with immigrants. We've helped a number of churches, people who have members of their congregation who need assistance. Actually helped a lot in our own congregation, so that's been a lot of fun to be able to help people like that in that capacity. Nonprofits, we get referrals from nonprofits when they need an attorney to handle a particular case. We've actually referred people to nonprofits in appropriate situations as well for services. We really want to be an asset to the community, provide information, knowledge, source of support, even other attorneys. If you're an attorney out there and you have questions, as long as I can verify that you're an attorney, be happy to give advice as well, consult on different types of cases. And the topic of today is the Violence Against Women Act. Okay, now one of the things we want to be careful with is confidentiality. When we're dealing with these sort of things, it's important that the client can feel comfortable speaking with the attorney or the attorney's staff or with a counselor about what they've suffered. It is going to be important to draft an affidavit as part of the application in order to document what is going on and why this individual qualifies under the law. a lot of that has to go into details, and that can be hard. We've had, like I've said, we've had many clients who apply for VAWA who are women, many who are men, and it doesn't matter. It could be, you could be gay, you could be straight, you could be anything, transgender, whatever. It's available to everyone. If you're married, if you're lawfully married to a U.S. citizen spouse or legal permanent resident spouse. Now, in some of those situations, we may have a client who's, for example, I'm a male attorney. I'm a man. I'm well into my 40s now. So you may have a client who just doesn't feel comfortable talking to another man about this. Totally okay with that. We have females on staff as well who are willing to work with the client, and help them through that whole process. And I never hold that against anyone. I absolutely understand, when you're a victim of extreme cruelty, it can really, it can be traumatic to relive those things. And we want our clients to be as comfortable, safe as possible. We also use private counselors from time to time and recommend that they get what is called a mental status exam. Now, this can run from, maybe a couple $100 to up to $1,000 and everywhere in between, where the person who's been a victim of domestic violence or extreme cruelty will sit down with a licensed counselor. In the state of Michigan, you can be a licensed psychiatrist, psychologist, or a licensed master of social work, right? Who are authorized under the statute, under law in Michigan, to provide counseling and therapeutic therapy services, talk therapy. And so we'll have them meet with this individual a few times and prepare what's called a mental status exam. This can actually be a key piece of evidence in a VAWA case. While it's not always strictly required, if you're going through the expense and effort of filing a VAWA petition, I don't know why you wouldn't obtain one unless you already have some sort of clinical or psychological analysis, because we need to show extreme hardship, that the person has suffered an extreme cruelty and that they will suffer an extreme hardship if they're removed from the United States. And the government's been tricky over the years with this determination. They'll say, when you submit an application, right? We talked about the process. There's a form. It's called the I-360. You can find it on uscis.gov. You file it with the government along with the documentation required in the instructions. And once that's submitted, the government's going to take a look at it, and they might send you what's called a request for evidence. And it seems to depend on who the president of the United States is at the time, how their attitude is toward immigrants, and also the overall workload of USCIS, right? They're supposed to go and undergo the same training. And honestly, this is probably something that should be determined by artificial intelligence now, because you can program it, right? You can program an AI robot to say, hey, does this person have extreme hardship according to these criteria? And it'll read it and say, bleep, yes, in like 3 seconds. So this is probably something that immigration should be doing, is analyzing these cases with artificial intelligence. In the meantime, what they may do is when this person is reviewing your case, they may send you a request for additional evidence. And they may say, look, we need you to send us more evidence that you're suffering an extreme hardship, or that you're suffering this or that or the other thing. That happens, not the end of the world. It's one more chance to send a little bit more evidence. And you might do that in the form of an additional mental status exam or a report from a psychiatrist or psychologist. Maybe some additional police reports have come out by then. Maybe there's some details you need to add to your affidavit. Maybe there's photographs on your phone. Maybe we got to talk about that. Evidence, right? Evidence that you keep on your phone. But all of these things, this can happen in the process of filing the application. They can say, send us more evidence by this date. Don't miss the deadline. Gather everything you can, submit that, and then the government will make a determination. Many times, if you give them something that they were asking for, it's enough. They're really just looking for something. Sometimes you might have a government worker who's working on a Friday, right? So you're looking at Friday. It's the end of the day. They've got maybe 5 more cases they're supposed to go through and fill out a checklist for. And it's a lot easier for them to just say, nah, send me more information. And they might just send that out. So it might be there may not be a lot really more to provide, but you just give them whatever. Give them whatever you can come up with that's responsive to what they're asking for. And then the case returns to processing, and hopefully it leads to an approval. Now let's talk a little bit about cell phones. I've had so many clients talk to me about cell phones that they have where they have photos or text messages or emails that have really good evidence, right? Someone got hit. Maybe somebody got, I know I'm using a touch up my parents. You can't really see the scratch. You might have a scratch on your face. Might be an injury, things like that. Don't lose your cell phone. Save those text messages. Print them out. Email them to someone. Email them to your Google account so you've got them safe and stored up in the cloud. I've had too many clients come to me and say, oh, I had all this good stuff on my cell phone, but I lost my cell phone, or my spouse took it and destroyed it, or it just mysteriously disappeared one day. Okay, evidence is evidence, and it's going to help your case. So whatever you do, take steps to preserve all of that evidence. Maybe something that's key in winning your case. So today our topic is VAWA cases, Violence Against Women Act. These are cases where someone is the victim of domestic violence or extreme cruelty, and they want to apply for a green card based on their own petition, based on having been a victim of that domestic violence or extreme cruelty by the hands of their U.S. citizen or legal permanent resident spouse. I know it sounds like I might be repeating myself, and I am, but that's because people keep jumping in and out of the show. So I want everybody to be up to date with that. I want to welcome you to the show. We are talking about immigration. We have immigration cases for victims of crimes, including domestic violence, extreme cruelty. Go ahead and put any questions you have into the comments. I will respond live if appropriate. Now, as we talk about victims of domestic violence, there's a lot of factors to take into consideration when trying to decide what is an appropriate case. We've had cases where a spouse of a U.S. citizen will come to us and say, hey, I was, the victim of extreme cruelty, and I just found out that my spouse is actually still married to their original spouse, either in a different country or in a different state. And so I had no idea. So legally speaking, are we still married? And in a situation like that, at least under the laws of Michigan, you got to look state to state, country to country to see what law applies. In the state of Michigan, that is a marriage that is void ab initio, or from the initial, or from the beginning, right? So if you have someone who's married to two people, the first one is the only one that counts, unless there's been a divorce or a death or something like that, right? Then the second marriage would be okay. But if they're currently married to two people, that second one does not count, not for immigration purposes or anything else. But in the context of a VAWA case, where you're saying you've been the victim of domestic violence, it actually can count in that one limited circumstance. So if you can prove, look, I've got this marriage license. The state didn't know he was married to someone else. I certainly didn't know he was married to someone else. He told me I was the only one. Come to find out that he's got this other marriage license with his first wife and they never got divorced. That can actually be a case that we can win under a VAWA situation. So that's kind of one of those unique circumstances. Those sort of happen once in a blue moon, but they happen enough that, there's court decisions about it and it's okay and you can do it. If you do have any questions about VAWA cases, immigration cases, family petitions, immigration court, asylum, what's going on at the border? Well, I'm not sitting on the border. Be happy to share some comments about that as well. So welcome to the show. This is Attorney James Betzold. I am a licensed attorney in the state of Michigan. I am licensed to practice law in the state of Michigan, throughout the United States, in front of immigration court, and in a number of federal courts in the United States. Here is my information. I actually do have a law office here in Grand Rapids and Holland, Michigan. Our philosophy and our idea is to unite families through immigration. Right? So that we're trying to be some of the good guys out there, helping to unite families, fight against the government when the government doesn't want to grant that initially, hold hands to clients who are going through the process. And today we are sharing some free information about one of the very popular types of cases. Now, one of the nice things about a VAWA case is this. A VAWA case, there's no limit to how many can be approved in any given year. Right now, if we're talking about other types of cases, a victim of a crime where you're not married to the person who's been abusive, maybe you're a victim of a felonious assault, an assault with a weapon, assault with a gun, murder, attempted murder, something like that. There's a limit. The government can only give out 10,000 of those visas per year. Under the VAWA program, highly advantageous because there's no limit. They can give out as many visas as are legitimately applied for by individuals. So that is one benefit to filing a VAWA case, because there is some overlap. Another day we'll talk more in depth about the U visa, or the visa for victims of crimes. And essentially in that situation, let's say you're driving down the road. Somebody has a road rage incident with you, right? They point a gun at you. Pull a gun out, they point it at you. You speed off, you call the police. The police investigate. Maybe they find the person, maybe they don't. But you made that police report, and you have a report of somebody assaulting you with a firearm. Any state you're in, that's going to be a felony. And if you're the victim of a felonious assault, an assault that's like to the level of being a felony, and you're undocumented, and you report the crime, and you help the police find the perpetrator of that crime, well, you could be eligible for a visa based on that. But again, only 10,000 of those visas are available per year. I think the last time I looked at the numbers, it was something like 120 or 130,000 people have applied for this visa. So we're easily looking at a 10 to 12, 13 plus year wait period. You could get a work permit in the meantime, but if you have the option, you're better off going with filing a VAWA case. Some of the overlap between the cases would be this. If you're the victim of domestic violence, you also could qualify to file a case for a U visa, right? That particular visa. So let's say you're the victim of domestic violence by a boyfriend, but you never got married. Well, then you can't file a VAWA case. Let's say you're the victim of domestic violence by a parent. But let's say your parent is not a U.S. citizen or resident. You can't file for VAWA, but you can file for a U visa. Let's say that your child is not a citizen and not a resident, but they commit domestic violence against you, the parent. This has happened too. We've had cases like this as well. You can't file for VAWA, but you can file for a U visa, because domestic violence is one of those qualifying criminal activities. So that's kind of a neat situation. Now, we've been talking a lot about spouses who commit domestic violence against their partners, right? Spouse on spouse, husband on wife, wife on husband, those sort of domestic violence crimes or extreme cruelty. However, we haven't yet talked about, so those of you who are sticking with us this long, congratulations. What if my U.S. citizen parent is treating me in an abusive manner or with extreme cruelty? Okay, because you might have a U.S. citizen parent. Maybe you've entered unlawfully the United States. You've entered unlawfully, you don't have papers, your parents didn't file for you, or it's something that's taken forever, and now your parents being abusive with you. Maybe they say no. Maybe it could be physically violent. Maybe it's emotionally abusive. It could be extreme cruelty in some other form or fashion. For example, you have to go work and you got to give me your paycheck because you owe me money. Okay, this would be another case of extreme cruelty. And while you may have an option with a U visa or even a T visa, human trafficking visa, you're better off with the VAWA case. It's much faster, gets you the residency more quickly. There's no limit to the number of visas in that category that can be handed out each year. So you can have a VAWA case not only for spousal violence, but other family dynamics. So if you've got a parent who's being abusive to you, or if you've got a child. So we got to think creatively here. If you're an immigrant and you've got a U.S. citizen child, maybe they were born here, or a resident child, maybe they obtained their green card somehow. And now your child, son or daughter, is being abusive to you, right? You live in the same household and they're being abusive, or they're treating you in an extremely cruel manner. Well, you can also qualify for VAWA based on that relationship, and that can be a good option as well. A lot of times we forget to talk about that because we're really focused on, probably 90% of the cases are spouse on spouse violence. Far less when it comes to children abusing parents or parents abusing children, or sons and daughters, but equally legitimate cases to bring. All right. Well, we've got a lot of things we can still cover. I did want to mention this. You may be out on TikTok, you may be out on Facebook, you may be out on YouTube seeing videos from attorneys who say, come to me and I will get you an attorney, or I will get you a green card here in the United States and you don't have to leave and it's really easy and it's great. Everybody should do it. Filing a VAWA case, filing one of these petitions where it's not true, where you're filing any sort of false information, is problematic for the immigrant and also for the attorney. I know attorneys who have gone to jail, gone to prison because they were committing fraud, right? It's a felony. Don't do that. And what a number of these attorneys might be doing is they might be saying, they don't tell you in the TikTok or in the YouTube video or in the other short video or ad, they might not say, oh, we're going to file a VAWA case for you. Well, that's only if you qualify. Right? Have you been the victim of domestic violence? Has someone been extremely cruel to you? And we might ask some probing questions about that. But it's not just that everybody come here, we're going to say this happened, bring me some affidavits, and we're good to go. That's actually a very dangerous thing to do. However, they are right in the sense that you don't have to leave the United States in order to obtain your green card through VAWA. Right? It's a process that takes place completely in the United States. Even if you entered unlawfully one time, if you entered once, no visa, or entered with the visa, overstayed, you can qualify for VAWA. Where it gets tricky is if you've entered more than once, right? If you've entered twice. And we got to look at the dates of when you entered, when you left. How long were you here the first time before you left? Was it before or after April 1st of 1997? Was it before then or was it after then? When you left, was it because you were deported or removed? There's other laws that come into play when we're dealing with VAWA cases. The immigrant has to be otherwise admissible, right? Can't be a drug trafficker and file for VAWA and try and cure everything. You can't be, you could try if you've got like 30 DUIs. You're probably not going to get your case approved, but you can try it, I suppose. Probably not the strongest case. If you're a terrorist, a VAWA is not going to cure that. And so you need to be otherwise admissible to the United States. And where some people, including attorneys, even get tripped up on is if you have an individual, let's take this fact pattern, right? They enter the United States once, they're here, they've stayed. Okay, never been deported or removed. Good, we can file. You got that same person who entered June 5th, 1997. They were here for a year, they left, and then they came back without permission. Okay, then we have to ask a few more questions because it happened after April 1st of 1997. So we have to say, all right, the law says they would be inadmissible because they were here for more than a year, left and came back without permission, right? During the dates where that law was effective. And so if we can tie their departure or re-entry to the domestic violence or domestic abuse or extreme cruelty that they suffered, then there's a waiver available. Other than that, they're going to be totally out of luck, even if the spouse wants to petition for them, because we're always dealing with the interaction of these 10-year bars or the 10-year permanent bar or the 3-year bar or the 10-year unlawful presence bar, which technically isn't permanent because there's a waiver for it unless you've been deported or removed or violate, some other section. So that's something we screen for at the beginning. You want to make sure that you're going to qualify for that from the very get-go. All right. Well, I'm glad I could have the opportunity to share some information with you all today. It is great to be able to do that again. Just for everyone, my name is Attorney James Betzold. Here is my banner, right? It's Attorney James Betzold here. We are uniting families through immigration. We do appointments via Zoom, via telephone, and also in our offices here in Holland, Michigan, or Grand Rapids, Michigan. So feel free to reach out and keep an eye open for our other streams. You'll be able to ask questions during our streams. If you have any questions today, go ahead and put your comments in there. I do see we have a couple people watching right now, so I will wait. And I will just wait to see if you put in a question for us to answer. Otherwise, the topic of today has been cases of VAWA. Hablamos inglés y español. So si tiene una pregunta en español, no dudes en mandarlo ahora mismo. Estoy aquí pendiente para escuchar. Voy a quedarme aquí unos 5 minutitos más para contestar preguntas. Puede ser de VAWA, puede ser de víctimas de delitos o otras preguntas que tienen que ver con inmigración. So if you have any questions, go ahead and do those now. I'm a licensed attorney in the state of Michigan. I've practiced in front of the immigration courts of the United States, federal courts, the federal appeals courts, which I guess includes federal district court, state courts, all sorts of topics. And I guess that's it. So I hope you have a great day. Thanks for joining us, and we will see you next time.